Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise. We bring you interviews with professionals in the movement and exercise field. The goal is to provide information for other professionals and also amateur movement aficionados, people who understand that movement is part of what makes life complete. Some of the people we interview you will have heard of. They're well known in and outside of the movement and exercise profession. Others you may not have heard of, but they have a great deal of knowledge to share. Many people doing the best work spend their time working with people, not working on their social media presence. We're going to give you a chance to learn from some of these talented and knowledgeable individuals, and we're going to learn along with you. Moving to Live podcasts are going to be short. Each interview will be long enough to impart usable information, but short enough to be able to be consumed in a single bout, during your workout, commute, or even during dinner prep. We all like long-form interviews, but time is valuable. Moving to Live wants to give you the option to learn and be entertained without needing to commit 60 minutes at a time for an interview. Give Moving to Live a listen. Check out our sister podcast, FitLab PGH, which highlights people, businesses, events, and activities in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area that make movement a priority. Moving to Live would love to hear from you. Want to connect with us or have an idea for somebody you think we ought to interview? Drop us an email, mov2liv@gmail.com, or connect with us on Instagram and Twitter, both _mov2liv. We're excited to bring you these interviews, and we think you'll enjoy each and every one that we bring you. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Moving to Live podcast. If you like what you hear, please leave us some feedback on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you listen to us on. If you have an idea for an interview, drop us a message through any of our social media channels. We're always looking for interesting people in the movement field who understand that movement is a lifestyle, not just an activity. Welcome back to another edition of the Moving to Live podcast. We are a podcast about movement and movement opportunities. We interview individuals who are involved in different aspects of the movement profession, all with the goal to break down movement silos. Along with our sister podcast, FitLab PGH, we firmly believe that movement should be treated as a lifestyle, not just an activity. Today, we've got a guest that we interviewed a little bit over 2 years ago who really had an interesting story about how he went from a failed baseball player to a personal trainer to a director of education at a national organization to a college professor. And I think one of the things that people often forget when they see that somebody's a college professor is it's not typically a 9-to-5 job. It's not something that you just teach the 2 or 3 classes that you're assigned to teach. It often involves more than that. And there's often a variety of reasons why people who are in the teaching profession switch and even move halfway across the country. Today, we're with Dr. Jay Dawes, who is now at Oklahoma State University. When we talked to him a little bit over 2 years ago, he was at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. And I'm especially appreciative that Jay is talking to us because I know that at 12 midnight tonight, or last night actually, he was at work collecting data, and we are at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I suspect we've got about 35 or 40 minutes before Dr. Dawes falls asleep. Jay, thanks for taking time to talk to Moving to Live once again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben. And rather than a failed baseball player, I'd prefer to be called aggressively mediocre. So
aggressively, and actually I'm looking at Dr. Dawes. He's on Zoom camera, and he's got his trophies behind him on his office wall at Oklahoma State.
There's so many. They deserve their own wall. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I always like to ask people when I interview them for Moving to Live, whether it's the first time or whether it's the second time, is you're stuck in an elevator, you've got your Oklahoma State t-shirt on, and somebody says, so what do you do there? And what's your boilerplate elevator speech? I'm Dr. Jay Dawes, and I take it from there.
Yeah, it's always tough to summarize it, but in a nutshell, I'm an assistant professor of exercise or applied exercise science with a primary emphasis in research on human performance optimization for the tactical athlete. So, long story short, what that means is here at Oklahoma State, I spend about 50% of my time in a teaching role. So I teach 2 courses, one undergraduate, one graduate. I mentor a handful of PhD as well as master's level students and try to kind of help guide them through the research process and basically help them kind of achieve what their academic goals are. And then in addition to that, 40% of my job is doing research in a variety of different areas, and about 10% of my time is spent doing service. And that service is really a pretty broad umbrella for a whole variety of things, as far as giving back basically to our department here at the university as a whole, the college, as well as the community.
And I know one of the questions I want to get out of the way, because I think it's interesting, very often when you see articles about college professors, they're like, you just said, I teach 2 classes. And they say, oh, well, you show up twice a week. You show up twice a week and maybe spend 10 minutes beforehand prepping. But that's not exactly true. We'll get a little bit more into the teaching. I know that we had to reschedule this because you said, look, I don't want to do it at 7 o'clock in the morning because I'm working at midnight. Why were you working at midnight when that's, other than people who do shift work, not something that you commonly think of when you talk about college professors or even strength coaches?
Yeah, well, I mean, in reality, the people that I do a lot of my research with are people that work shifts. So, in order to, try and help serve them as best I can and accommodate their schedules, sometimes you have unorthodox hours that you have to accommodate. And, fortunately, it's one of those things where I actually do genuinely love my job. And, going in and, doing testing from midnight till 2:30 a.m. is actually a joy, believe it or not, and not something that is something that I actually dread doing. And like I said, when it's all said and done, it's kind of a cool story, because not too many people do, go in at midnight and do research with cool people and doing cool things. So,
and I know you said you're an assistant professor. I
was an associate professor, but now I'm an assistant again. So,
and that's a nice way to segue. You were at a different institution, and a lot of times you think somebody gets a tenure track job and they say, okay, I'm set here for life. And you were at a different institution. You were tenured. You were an associate professor, which is kind of the middle level, assistant, associate, full professor. And from all aspects, had a pretty sweet gig, and you made a decision to pack up your family and move them a couple of states, not halfway across the country, but a couple of states away to Oklahoma State University. How did that come about, and what was the decision that brought that on?
Yeah, it's one of those things where the position that I'm in now was my dream job 20 years ago, as far as from an academic perspective. It was one of those positions that I wanted it, but I never thought I would have the opportunity to get it. And so, a couple of years ago, I was actually approached by a couple of people in the department who were my mentors, and they said, hey, we have a position open. We'd really like you to apply. And, at that point in time, I was an associate professor, full tenured position. And, it's kind of hard to, think about weighing that out and walking away from it. But quite honestly, again, with the people that are here, the team that we have, and, the opportunities that Oklahoma State provides, it was one of those things where, I would have always regretted if I hadn't made the jump. And, even taking a step back as far as rank is well worth the opportunity that's here, and getting to work with a team that's just a phenomenal group of people. It's one of those things where coming into work every day, working with a team like this, it's a true collaborative environment. Everybody's rooting and pulling for one another, and it's just been fantastic. And, there is something to be said for people from Oklahoma. They're just good people here. I say that being in Oklahoma, so I'm obviously a little bit biased, but.
And I think what you also haven't said, you're at Oklahoma State now, and that's where you did your undergrad also, correct?
No, I did not, but I did my master's and my PhD. So, I probably am, one of those few professors. I mean, I would venture to say in the top 1-2% who actually get to go back to their alma mater and teach. So, as far as the university goes, it's hard to imagine me being more invested than I could possibly be here. So,
and I know one of the other things that people often think about, as much as we'd like it to be, college professors aren't at the upper echelon of what they bring in money. And I know from talking with you when you were thinking about making the move, one of the things that kind of made it attractive is the opportunity for your kids to potentially go to Oklahoma State also.
Yeah, that was one of the major benefits is, that there is a tuition benefit here. So, that will certainly help out financially in the long run. And, also it's gained me some favor with my father-in-law because his alma mater was Oklahoma State as well. So now that I've pretty much guaranteed him 3 grandchildren that will graduate from Oklahoma State, he's given me a little bit extra favor on that. So,
and of course, I know as somebody who went to Auburn University, where Auburn and Alabama were bitter rivals, my question would be, what happens if one of your kids figures out a way that they want to go to Oklahoma?
Well, as I've said before, they can go wherever they want, but their money's going to Oklahoma State, so that's fine.
We're talking with Dr. Jay Dawes, who's at Oklahoma State. You mentioned at the beginning of the interview that your three main areas of responsibility are teaching, research, and service. And I think a lot of times people think of college professors, they think that either they don't do any teaching at all and they do all research, or they do all research and they hire adjuncts or temporary faculty to do the teaching. But what's really never talked about a whole lot is the service. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more, because you've been at two different institutions, what exactly for you specifically constitutes a service? And I think one of the things that's important for listeners, if they're thinking about going into academia or they don't understand it, is you don't get additional money for this. This is part of your responsibility. And it's one of those things, if it's anything like the positions that I've been at and currently I'm at, it's kind of a gray area. You almost have to, in some instances, use your imagination, and not in a negative way, but sell it or explain to people who maybe don't understand what your expertise is. Look, this is what I'm doing and it counts as service.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's one of the things, service is one of those, areas that does tend to be a little bit fuzzy at times, depending on kind of what your areas of expertise are. I think when you look at service from a university perspective, the things that are going to be more mainstream would be, doing service on different committees within the university at the university, the college, and the department level. And those are ones that are a little bit easier to kind of comprehend and get people's head wrapped around. With what I do in particular, I spent the majority of my career as a practitioner, and I still coach even to this day. And for me, like, part of what I do is help provide guidance and act as a resource for different, organizations, agencies, strength coaches, and things of that nature to help guide and steer best practice and really work with them to help make sure that they're getting their, either first responders, military personnel, or athletes the best possible programs and services that they can give. So, that gets a little bit, again, challenging as far as trying to quantify that, because, a lot of times it's not something where you're, when I pick up the phone and I talk to somebody, I don't start the timer. And there's a lot of projects that, we do, collaboratively with other groups that, they don't make it to a CV. They don't make it to, a line item on, a development plan or anything of that nature. It's just kind of what you do as part of, the responsibility you have as far as, being in the position that you're in. So, I guess, to answer your question, honestly, even in my answer, it was pretty vague. But I give you a couple other, for instances, there's several law enforcement agencies that I've worked with in the last year that have been looking for guidance as far as developing, occupational tests and validations, looking at injury prediction for their cadets, things of that nature, and really just trying to provide information to them based off the research that we've done and, different people that we've worked with to kind of help guide them and give them some advice as far as how to proceed with their operations.
And I know the other area that you're heavily involved in is in research with tactical. And I think this is a great opportunity to get some information out there. A lot of times when people hear the term tactical, they think, special forces in the military. And they don't really think all of the other things that are involved with that. So in your experience and in your expertise, if you could explain to the listeners, when you hear tactical, you should think more than just, Army Rangers, Navy SEALs. Talk a little bit about what the tactical individuals that you work with are.
Yeah, and really that's the thing is when you look at first responders, I mean, that really goes from everybody who's elite special forces, from Navy SEALs to people who are dispatchers who are kind of cyber warriors, so individuals who are doing a lot of their work behind a computer and trying to help keep the country and our communities safe as well. So there's really a wide range of individuals when you look at that tactical space, and I think a lot of times we tend to gravitate toward the special teams and the people that are kind of at the upper echelons as far as from a performance standpoint in that area, because we know they're in high risk situations. We know that they're going to be doing things that are highly physically demanding, but in a lot of cases, the people who are behind the scenes who are helping support those individuals also need those services as well. And, we've kind of talked about the kinetic versus the cyber warrior, where, you have people who are highly driven by movement and have to do that. And then we have other people who, again, don't move very much as part of their job, but nonetheless, it supports the entire effort. So, trying to improve, health, fitness, and performance for that wide gamut of individuals really creates a lot of challenges because there's a lot of unique needs. Many times, when you look at working with athletes in particular, you look at a group, for the most part, it's relatively homogenous. I mean, you can go in and for the most part say, probably everybody's got a decent amount of power and strength and speed and agility and things of that nature. And certainly you got your outliers one way or the other, but you walk into a law enforcement agency or, even a firehouse. I mean, I've joked before, it's like a lot of times it's like walking into a department store. It's like you get a pretty good cross section of the population, where we have people who are amazingly fit and people who, got some things to work on. And, trying to create programs that are going to meet the needs of those diverse individuals is a challenge for a lot of people, especially the individuals that are first responders who have been tasked to help provide those services to their colleagues.
And I know one of the things that just occurred to me as you said this, you mentioned cyber warriors. I know there's a growing area of people in the fitness performance world, for lack of a better term, who are working with e-athletes or athletes, individuals who are professionals who play video games.
Right.
And on the one hand, you laugh and say, well, that's a bunch of nerds or geeks sitting behind a computer. But on the other hand, if you consider they're doing repetitive tasks, very small motions, they have to be alert mentally, not medically. There's the requirement for them to, if they're morbidly obese or they have breathing problems, that can affect their performance. Have you taken any of that information or looked at any of that for working with the tactical individuals who are less active than some of the more active ones, the ones who are more cyber oriented?
I'm so sorry, Dan. Let me clarify the question. So when you say that, like working with them, as far as like from what perspective?
Well, there's a small but growing body of research and applied information on working with e-athletes or people who play video games professionally. Have you looked at any of that information and possibly thought about how that could kind of piggyback or go over to the more general work that you do with your tactical athletes?
Yeah, probably not so specific as the e-athletes, but what we have looked at is some of the stuff that's done with like war fighters and things of that nature. So people who maybe have to sit in a cockpit for an extended period of time and have to have razor sharp reaction time and perceptual and decision making skills and things of that nature. So we do look at that. Most of the people that I work with, it's there's not necessarily as large a sense of urgency because I don't necessarily work with anybody who's in that space that's would be considered like your cyber warriors. But the big thing that we really try and focus on with them is, the stress of the job and looking at, what is the job doing to you? So, as we know now, sitting is really not the best thing for long-term health and fitness. And, they spend a large majority of their time sitting in a chair. So a lot of times what we try and do is approach their training and their programming by, trying to undo what the job is doing to them. And a lot of times it's really, it's the mental and emotional trauma that's caused by the job because, unfortunately, these are great people who are, trying to help keep, us safe, but they have to look at horrible things all day long. And they have to deal with, people who, aren't always the nicest people. And when you look at society, and unfortunately that has a downstream effect as far as overall, health and wellness and attitude and things of that nature. So really what we're trying to do is from a mental and emotional standpoint, really combat, some of the negative consequences that the job has, not only from a physical standpoint, but also the mental and emotional standpoint as well.
And what are some ways in a practical setting that you address and provide them with tools to deal with the mental and emotional stress that occurs from the job?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, and it sounds, trite, and we all probably know this, but exercise is a fantastic way to help ameliorate some of those stresses and, basically to switch focus as well from, the things that they're having to work on a daily basis that may be, again, a little bit more, not quite as pleasant. Some of the things we've actually looked into is like some work that's done with trauma. There's been some pretty good evidence that shows, I know in the past, both of us have done a fair amount of running, but there's actually a lot of evidence now that shows that doing things like maybe trail running or things that cause you to have to switch your attentional focus between different objects, like fall avoidance and things of that nature, might actually be more beneficial from a brain stimulation standpoint as well as a stress standpoint than just like grinding out miles on a treadmill or elliptical or whatever it may be. So trying to integrate some of those things in where we can kind of switch the focus off of just grinding out mileage and grinding out a certain duration of time to things that keep them mentally active and kind of switch their focus from those internal thoughts that may be carried over from work to things that are a little bit more performance and maybe even kind of play oriented as well. Trying to meet different challenges and things like that and different workouts and so on and so forth.
And what's been the feedback from the individuals that you've worked with doing this for maybe the ones who have that grind mentality? If I run more miles, it's better. Or if I spend more days in the weight room and bench press more days, and that's better. And the idea of what you're describing is physical play is kind of like, well, but that doesn't make sense. How do they respond?
So I think the thing about it is it's as I said before, you've got all kinds of people. And it's got to match their style. So with those folks, we try to find things that are going to be physically challenging that's going to kind of put the tick in the box for them in that way, versus trying to force them into a mold that doesn't fit them. Like to give you an example, like, for the people that tend to be like more grinder type people, we do things that are, they're called complexes, where you may do a series of 3 to 4 exercises with a dumbbell. They're all done together in a row, and you try to do like 3 to 4 rounds of that without ever putting a barbell or a dumbbell down. So that's very, from an endurance standpoint, it's really, really challenging, and people who tend to be grinders really do enjoy that type of stuff. Other people want nothing to do with that whatsoever. So some people, if I were to tell them that, hey, this is what you need to do, they would literally never talk to me again. So really what it is, I think the big challenge is like you actually have to sit down and know the people and talk to them and find out what are your wants, what are your needs, what will you do, what won't you do, because it's got to fit their personality, it's got to fit their style, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, which quite honestly, from a research perspective, is one of the massive challenges that I have as far as trying to do research studies within these populations, because a lot of times when we work with athletics or, different groups, we'll give you, here's your set program. You're going to do this. We'll make some modifications and tweaks here or there. But, as I said before, we've got some people like literally that were professional athletes that are in this space, and others who have never done anything really active at all outside of their job. And we're trying to find things that are get them motivated and excited about working out. And unfortunately, that's not, a one-size-fits-all approach just does not work. So subsequently, from a research perspective, that isn't super clean. But I think that's the challenge, is trying to be in that space and trying to give them what they need, is really trying to adjust it based off what their goals are, and making sure that it fits what they want and not necessarily what I'm trying to do just to get a research study published.
I'm curious, with the individuals that you work with their job responsibilities, is it a requirement that they pass a specific fitness test, or does it depend from one organization to another, what you work with?
Yeah, it widely varies. So depending on the organization, a lot of organizations will have set fitness standards that they utilize. I will say this, the overwhelming majority do not. One of the major reasons for that is, trying to develop a validated fitness standard is incredibly difficult. And subsequently, there's a lot of lawsuits that surround that area as far as, what is the minimum level of physical requirement that's necessary to actually do a job, efficiently and effectively. And there's a lot of these, a lot of agencies will set fitness standards and get taken to court and trying to defend it. And honestly, it's a very, very hard number to defend unless you've done a true validation study with it. And even in that case, it's still a challenge. So, you couple that along with, a lot of things related to union type activity and things of that nature. A lot of people just choose not to incorporate fitness tests that are based off punitive measures. So, a lot of agencies will have voluntary fitness programs that may have some like aspirational standards, but very few now do actually have ones that's a hard, pass fail type standard.
I can imagine that there are some individuals that you work with that it's, they just take to it like a duck on water. It's like finally somebody who can give me more information and explain, why is it that I can't bench press 3 days in a row, or why can't I run, 15 miles after work all 5 days of the work week. But then you probably have, and your job with them is probably to down-regulate them or tell them that, less is more across all aspects. But then you probably, if it's anything like people who work in the wellness arena, you have groups of people, hopefully relatively small, who, you come in and you say, I'm Dr. Dawes, or I'm Jay, I'm here to help you with improve the fitness. And they look at you and say, ain't going to do it. Don't have time. Not going to do it unless you pay me. How do you approach those individuals when you're kind of brought in and they look at you and say, yeah, it's just not going to happen?
Honestly, it's one of those things where, they're human beings, and obviously I'm invested in them. And, if they ever need my help, I'm there for them to help them. But the reality is, like, they're grown men and women, so they've got a choice. And the thing about exercise, like, it's got to be a personal decision. So it's one of those things where I just let them, hey, I'm a resource. I'm here. I'm available. If you ever want to talk about this, that's great. If not, I mean, if you want to talk about your favorite baseball team or football team, I'm happy to do that too. But I mean, a lot of it is relationship driven. I think, it's one of those things where a lot of times when I come in, I think there's this perception like, oh, great, here's going to be this guy that's going to force exercise down our throat and, try and, make us do X, Y, and Z that we don't want to do. And that's really not the case. I mean, it's one of those things where I'm there to help. If I'm able to do that and they would like me to do that, I'm all in. And, there's going to be a handful of people that, I mean, the top 20% probably don't need me anyway, because they probably got it pretty dialed in. It may be a few like tips or suggestions or just kind of wargaming what they're doing, and they're right on track and don't need a lot. The bottom 20%, a lot of times they don't want my help. And in that case, again, I'm there if they need me. And then, there's the people in the middle who, sometimes they need advice, some need full on programs. It's really just kind of a mixture of, all kinds of people. And I think that's the thing is that, they're people. So, it's one of those things, anytime you're working with people, it's not always going to be perfect as far as what the programming looks like and, what the needs are. And really you're just trying to help serve them in whatever capacity that you can.
We're talking with Dr. Jay Dawes, who is an assistant professor at Oklahoma State University, specializing in working with tactical individuals and first responders. You've mentioned some of the various ways that you are available and are a resource for individuals involved in this field. How does that integrate with the work that you do, if at all, with a nutritional standing? Do you commonly associate or work in conjunction with a registered dietitian or somebody who can offer dietary recommendations?
Yeah, actually I do. And, and that's one of the great things about now that I'm here at Oklahoma State. Like, I've got a couple of colleagues in human sciences, specifically Dr. Jill Joyce. She and I have been doing a lot of work together, trying to look at dietary records of, law enforcement officers, firefighters, military personnel, Army ROTC, and trying to, kind of see one, like what's the culture, what's the climate, what's the environment, what are they doing? And then are there any low hanging fruit things, no pun intended on that we can do that will help just move the needle a little bit to, get them, toward better health. And I think that's the big thing is like not trying to completely, dominate or change everything and, try and put people on special diets. Cause one, it's not practical, and two, it's hard to sustain, but it's just trying to move toward better health and wellness in the long run. So yeah, for me, I've been very fortunate to have somebody that I work with that is an actual RD. In my position from a scope of practice standpoint, I'm able to provide some real basic nutritional education and, provide guidance on generally well accepted practices, but to go in and actually detail out a nutritional profile for somebody or, say, hey, at 10 a.m. you need to have a turkey sandwich and, carrot sticks. I can't do that, but, Jill's in a position where she can. So, having that person as an asset and a colleague has really, really helped out. And I think that's the one thing that has been great, especially moving toward, this tactical space, is there's a lot of people out there who are more than willing to help. And quite frankly, there's a lot of people out there that know a whole lot more than I do. And I think that's one of the things is, it's sometimes you got to be pretty humble about what you know and what you don't know, and use your network. And if you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably doing something wrong. So I think that's the one thing that I'm probably about the only thing I'm very good at, is recognizing people who are smarter than me and going out and reaching out to them, and making sure that, again, I don't do a disservice to the people that I'm working with, and, that they are getting what they need. And, honestly, most of the things that I do, like I bounce it off several of my colleagues and, get input and get advice to make sure that, the things that we're promoting are actually going to be the best things for them.
I know one of the things that you've emphasized both in this interview and just when I've talked with you outside of the interview is the fact that there really is not a homogeneous group of individuals. It really is heterogeneous. And there's, as you said, I think you described this like going into a department store.
Yeah.
I'm curious with that in line. I mean, you've said, you have to individualize programs to some extent, but I know one of the other things that we haven't really touched on, but I think it's really important. Everybody thinks of strength and conditioning as helping to build and strengthen teams. And if you go into a collegiate or a high school setting, or unfortunately probably now as young as 5 or 6 years old setting, before a competition, they're going to be designing strength and conditioning programs so they peak at a specific date before the actual competition or before practice. There's going to be somebody out there, somebody like you or somebody like me, leading the dynamic stretches, leading a variety of other warm-up activities. And yet the individuals that you work with don't have that advantage. They can't get called out on a fire call and say, oh, hold on a second, we've got 15 minutes to warm up before we get on the fire trucks.
Right.
On the one hand, you think about SWAT team members and things like that, but really across the board with first responders, they may not have time to warm up. How do you approach that? And how do you approach the fact that the standardized type of periodized training that so many personal trainers and strength coaches like to adapt isn't really well suited for somebody who is working in a first responder or tactical field, because they have to have a pretty significant level of fitness most of the time, if not all the time. They can't say, oh, no, today's not a good day for me to chase after you. I'm tapering.
Right. Yeah. I mean, really, a lot of it gets down to, you got to be flexible. So over the last couple of years, I've had some colleagues and, that I've talked to, and we kind of like to deem it flexible periodization. So bottom line, there is kind of an overriding plan, but the plan has to be adjustable. And, recognizing that, most of these individuals don't have to be exceptional at anything at any one time, but they need to be extremely okay at everything. So, they've got to, have a decent amount of strength, a decent amount of muscular endurance, of cardiovascular fitness, mobility, flexibility. Because, as you said before, you never know when something bad's going to happen. And, ideally, everybody's, warmed up and ready to go before, that, something bad occurs, but we know that's not the case. So, one of the main things that we just try to do is approach it from a standpoint is like, if we build a bigger capacity and, we improve your flexibility, your mobility, your overall strength, your, cardiovascular endurance, when you get called in that situation that's not exactly perfect, hopefully you have a greater capacity before you break. And, realistically, that's the best we can really do. And I hate it because, I had a good friend, say it not too long ago. It was like, no matter how big you are, you're not going to, be bigger than a bullet. And that's a hard prospect too, because, we want to give people every opportunity to be successful, but, there's some things that we can't control. And that's tough. And that's really tough, especially for me, like, with the groups that I work with, like, we develop some pretty strong relationships, and some of my best friends in the world now are law enforcement personnel and firefighters, and it's tough because you know what you can do, you know what you can't do, and I think from my perspective, you just give them every opportunity they can to be successful. But in reality, it's not. In some ways, it's not much different being a strength coach, because when I was working with our men's and women's soccer team at the last university, all I can do is help them build the capacity and the physical, requirements that they need to be successful. And then after that, it's really up to them, and they've got to figure out how to transfer that into what they do, because they're the experts in their area. And, my job is to get them ready. Their job is to figure out how to use those new skill sets in their environment.
We're talking with Dr. Jay Dawes from Oklahoma State University. I think a final question to touch on that I think a lot of listeners, especially if they're looking at either potentially changing jobs or professions, or if we've got some students listening, is you are involved in the tactical field. And I know when you first started out in this field, you were a personal trainer, owned a personal training facility. For somebody who maybe is still mobile or looking for that right spot, what are some suggestions you can offer where they can gain insight and some education? So when a job comes up in this area, maybe not as a researcher, if they're just a bachelor's or master's, actually not just, if they have a bachelor's or a master's, they don't want to be in a teaching setting. They don't want to be in a research setting, but they want to work with these first responders and tactical athletes. How do they get the experience to be able to do that?
I think probably one of the best ways is to try and link up with individuals who are already in that space that are working with them. The thing about it is I think within those communities, they got to know that you're in it for the right purposes and that you're actually there to serve them. Because unfortunately, I've seen a lot of people try to enter into that space because it was a way that they could bolster their profile and not really do the right thing for the people that they're trying to serve. And quite frankly, like, these people are the best in the world at sniffing out people who don't have good intentions. So, it's a really bad move to be somebody who doesn't have their best interest at heart and trying to enter into that space. I think that's the one thing is, like, if you really want to work with those types of groups, one, you got to be genuine. Always tell the truth. A lot of times, regardless of whether that's popular or not. To be diplomatic about it. You don't have to, come out with, guns blazing, no pun intended, but, the best thing that you can do is, like, link up with people who are well respected in that area and let them kind of help serve as a kind of a gateway to introduce you to those folks and start working with them. Because, a lot of times, if they don't know you, like you, and trust you, they're not going to let you into their environment. And frankly, that's smart on their part. So, if you can gain credibility via extension, that somebody that trusts you, then that goes a long way.
Great information from Dr. Jay Dawes. Jay, I want to thank you for taking time from your busy schedule, talking a little bit about the work of somebody in academia, and more importantly, highlighting and kind of explaining to people what it actually means when you work with tactical athletes across the variety of professions. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Moving to Live. Make sure you check out the show notes for contact information for our latest guest, as well as links about all the things we talked about. Intro and exit music is Traveling Light by Jason Shaw. You can subscribe to Moving to Live on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play, and be notified about new episode releases. Have any questions, comments, or suggestions? Drop us an email, mov2liv@gmail.com. Connect with us on Twitter or Instagram, both _MOV2LIV. Please tell your friends about Moving to Live. It's a go-to place for information for movement and exercise professionals and amateur aficionados who understand that movement is part of what makes your life complete. Until next week, keep on moving.